Robert Duvall stopped for a broken-down truck on a rural Virginia highway and discovered that the man standing beside it had served 2 tours in Vietnam and hadn't asked anyone for help in 30 years. What Duvall said when the man tried to refuse the ride is something the veteran has repeated to every person he has told the story to since. It was a Tuesday morning in April 2005, and Robert Duvall was driving south on Route 29 through Fauquier County, Virginia, 40 minutes from his farm, returning from an early appointment in Warrenton. The morning was clear and cool in the particular way of Virginia April, the kind of morning that is genuinely pleasant to drive through, the kind that makes the state worth the winters. He was in no hurry. He had nowhere to be until the afternoon. He saw the truck at 9:15. He was listening to the radio, a news program that he had turned down but not off. And he was thinking about the afternoon and what it required, and the truck on the shoulder registered in his peripheral vision in the ordinary way that objects on highway shoulders register: present, noted, receding in the rearview mirror. He drove another 300 yards. He braked and pulled a U-turn where the road allowed it and drove back. It was a dark green Ford F250, maybe 15 years old, pulled onto the gravel shoulder with its hazard lights going. The truck was well maintained in the way that working trucks are well maintained by people who depend on them. Clean, no rust, the kind of vehicle that is not new, but has been taken care of. The man standing beside it was leaning against the driver's door with his arms crossed, watching the traffic pass. He was not waving anyone down. He was not holding a phone. He was standing beside his truck on the shoulder of Route 29 with the particular stillness of a man who is accustomed to solving his own problems and is currently working out how to solve this one. Route 29 through Fauquier County carries a mix of commuter traffic and farm and ranch vehicles in the early morning. The particular demographic of a road that runs through working countryside close enough to suburban Virginia that both worlds use it. Duvall had been driving it for more than a decade and knew its rhythms. He knew the stretch of shoulder where trucks sometimes pulled over near the grain elevator, the spot where deer crossed at dawn, the place where the road widened before the Warrenton exit. He knew the road well enough to drive it without thinking about it, which left his attention available for other things. Duvall had passed perhaps 40 cars already pulled over this way that morning, the ordinary broken-down vehicle shoulder of a commute route in the early morning. He had not stopped for any of them. He would not have been able to say, if asked, why he stopped for this one, not in terms that would satisfy someone looking for a clear reason. There was something in the quality of the man's stillness, perhaps, or in the specific way he was standing that was neither helpless nor resigned, but simply present with a problem. Whatever it was, Duvall was on the shoulder before he had fully decided to be there. He eased onto the shoulder and rolled down his window. The man looked at him. He was in his early 60s, lean, weathered, work clothes, the face of someone who spends most of his time outdoors. His expression when Duvall pulled over was not relief. It was the carefully neutral expression of someone managing the situation and who has not yet decided what category this new development belongs in. "You all right?" Duvall asked. "Alternator," the man said. "Already called the shop. They're sending someone." He paused. "I'm fine." The last 2 words carried more weight than the words themselves. Duvall put the car in park. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked. The man considered this. "About an hour and a half." "How long until they get here?" Another pause. "Could be another 2 hours." Duvall looked at him. The morning sun was full on the shoulder of the road. It was going to be warm by midday. "Where do you live?" Duvall asked. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the shift of someone who has registered where this is going and is preparing a response. "About 12 miles north," he said. "I said I'm fine." "I heard you," Duvall said. "I'm asking where you live." The man looked at him for a moment with the direct, assessing look of someone who has learned, through specific experience, to evaluate people quickly and without sentimentality. "Why?" he said. "Because you've been standing on a highway shoulder for an hour and a half," Duvall said, "and you're going to be standing there for another 2, and I'm going north." The man was quiet. "I don't need a ride," he said. "I know you don't need one," Duvall said. "I'm offering one. There's a difference." Something in that distinction seemed to land differently than the previous exchanges. The man's arms, which had been crossed since Duvall pulled over, dropped slightly. He looked at the truck, at the traffic on Route 29, at the clear April morning. "Name's Frank Calder," he said. "Robert Duvall," Duvall said. Frank Calder looked at him. "I know who you are," Frank said. He said it in the flat, unhurried way of a man delivering information rather than a reaction, no elevation, no adjustment of register. "My wife made me watch Tender Mercies twice." He paused. "I thought it was a good film." "Thank you," Duvall said. "Get in." Frank Calder got in. He directed Duvall off Route 29 at the second exit north through a series of county roads that ran through horse country and timberland and the particular landscape of Fauquier County that has been changing slowly since the Civil War and still looks, in certain lights, like it hasn't changed at all. They drove for 12 miles. Frank gave directions in the economical way of someone who knows a road well enough to describe it in landmarks rather than distances. They were 7 miles in when Duvall asked how long Frank had lived out this way. "Born here," Frank said, "except for the service." "What branch?" Duvall asked. "Army," Frank said. 2 tours, 68 and 70. Duvall was quiet for a moment. Vietnam in 68 and 70. The years that particular war had been at its most brutal and least understood by the people who had sent the men who fought it. He had played veterans, he had researched veterans, he had spent time with men who had come back from those 2 years, changed in ways that their families and their country had not been equipped to receive. "How was it?" Duvall asked. Frank Calder looked at him with the expression of someone locating a question within its context before answering it, not buying time, but ensuring that what he said was the right response to what had actually been asked rather than what was usually asked. He had been asked versions of this question for 35 years. Most people who asked it were asking how it felt, or whether it was bad, or whether he was okay now. Duvall had not asked any of those things. He had asked how it was. Past tense, subject to subject. Frank Calder looked at him. It was the look of someone being asked a question they have been asked before, in various forms by various people, and who has a practiced response for those occasions. A response that is not dishonest, but that is carefully calibrated to end the inquiry efficiently. He did not give the practiced response. "It was the thing that happened," Frank said. "Before it, there was before. After it, there was after. That's about the size of it." Duvall nodded. He had heard that formulation before, in different words from different men. It was, he thought, the most accurate description of that kind of experience that language could produce. They drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, the comfortable silence of 2 men who have said what needed saying and are under no obligation to fill the remaining miles with anything else. Frank gave the last set of directions. Duvall followed them. The house was a white farmhouse at the end of a gravel drive, well kept, a vegetable garden visible on the south side, a barn that had been converted into a workshop at the edge of the property. A woman in her 60s appeared on the porch as the car pulled in. Frank's wife, Margaret, who had not been expecting her husband home at 9:45 on a Tuesday morning, and whose expression moved through several stages of confusion before settling on the recognition of the man getting out of the car with her husband. Frank Calder introduced them. Margaret Calder shook Duvall's hand and asked if he would come in for coffee. Duvall said he would, for a few minutes. He stayed for 45 minutes, which was 35 minutes longer than he had intended, and the correct amount of time for what the kitchen table conversation turned out to be. Margaret Calder was the kind of person whose kitchen has the quality of a room that people have been comfortable in for a long time, the specific ease of a space that has absorbed decades of ordinary life and holds it without effort. Duvall felt it when he sat down and did not feel the need to account for why he was still there when the original few minutes had passed. He drank Margaret's coffee, which was considerably better than the coffee at his appointment in Warrenton, and he sat at the kitchen table with Frank and Margaret Calder and talked about Fauquier County and the farm and the workshop in the converted barn, where Frank built furniture from timber he sourced himself and sold at a market in Warrenton on Saturdays. Frank showed him 2 chairs he was working on. Duvall examined them with the attention he gave most things, unhurried, genuinely interested, asking specific questions about the joinery and the wood selection that Frank answered with the precision of a man explaining something he knows completely. At 10:45, Duvall stood. "I'll drive back and wait with the truck until the shop gets there," he said. Frank looked at him. "You don't have to do that," Frank said. "I know," Duvall said. "I'll call you when they've got it." He shook Frank's hand. He shook Margaret's hand. He drove back to Route 29, pulled in behind the green F250, and waited for 40 minutes until the shop truck arrived, explained the situation to the mechanic, watched the truck get loaded, and confirmed with the mechanic that it would be ready by Thursday. He called Frank from the shoulder of Route 29, standing outside his car in the April afternoon, with the highway noise around him and the mechanic's truck pulling away ahead. The call was brief. The information was simple. The truck would be ready Thursday. The shop had his number if anything else came up. Frank asked how long Duvall had waited. Duvall told him 40 minutes. Frank was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he had something to say that was taking him time to find the right words for. He called Frank from the shoulder of Route 29 to let him know. Frank Calder picked up on the second ring. There was a pause after Duvall gave him the information. "I haven't let anyone do something like this for me in a long time," Frank said. "I know," Duvall said. "You made that clear." Another pause. "I appreciate it," Frank said. "The chairs are good work," Duvall said. "The joinery on the back rail is exceptional." He drove home. He arrived at 11:40. He made himself lunch, which he had been planning to make at 10:30, and ate it on the porch in the April noon sun, and the morning had the quality of a morning in which more had happened than the schedule had provided for, and which had been better for it. He sat with his coffee for a while afterward, looking at the fields, in no particular hurry to begin the afternoon. He did not mention it to anyone. Frank Calder told the story to his son that Sunday at dinner. His son asked how he had ended up in Robert Duvall's car. Frank said he had been standing on the side of the road, and Duvall had stopped and offered a ride, and he had tried to refuse, and Duvall had said something that made it impossible to refuse. His son asked what he had said. Frank thought about it for a moment. He was not a man who answered questions quickly when the answer mattered, which was a quality his son had inherited, and which his wife had long since accepted as a feature rather than a limitation. He said there's a difference between needing something and someone offering it, Frank said, and that I was confusing the two. His son wrote that down. The two chairs Frank Calder built in the spring of 2005 are his best-known work among the people who follow the Warrenton market. He has been asked many times if they are for sale. He says they are not. He does not explain why. Frank Calder has been selling his furniture at the Warrenton market for 20 years. He still builds everything from timber he sources himself. He delivered 2 chairs to a farm outside Washington, Virginia, 6 months after the Tuesday morning on Route 29. He left them on the porch with a note that said only, "For the joinery comment." Robert Duvall has been sitting in one of them for 19 years. The other is on the opposite side of the porch. On clear mornings in the spring and fall, both chairs are occupied. Margaret Calder, when asked about the Tuesday morning in April, gives the same answer every time. "A man stopped for Frank on the highway," she says. Frank tried to say no. The man explained why no wasn't the right answer. Frank got in the car. She pauses. "That's the whole story. The rest is just what happened after." She is not wrong. If this story reminded you that accepting help with dignity is its own kind of strength, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. More stories about what it really means to be Robert Duvall are coming every single week.